This presentation answers the question if in a numerical methods course at USF, the use of practice tests and replacing unit tests in the course to cumulative ones, would it improve the performance of students in a final exam, and would it improve the classroom environment? We all are familiar with the 2014 seminal meta-study paper on active learning by Scott Freeman and his colleagues. They found that 34% of students failed their course under traditional lecturing compared to 22% of students under active learning. Performance in exams of students taught with active learning was 6 percentage points higher than those in the traditional lecture, which basically translated to an effect size of 0.47. It is noteworthy as the average effect size of education interventions is about 0.38, and to give you some context, it can be as high as 0.8 for one-on-one tutoring. In a 2020 meta-study paper by Theobald and his colleagues, what they found was that active learning narrowed the achievement gap between underrepresented and overrepresented students on exam scores by 33% and course passing rates by 45%. At USF, we have been using blended learning in the numerical methods course since the mid-2000s, and now approximately one-third to one-half of the class time is spent on active learning activities such as think, pair, share, conceptual exercises via handouts or clickers, in-class procedural exercises, and outlining of programming projects and applied exercises. Because the active learning displaces the coverage of some content in the class, students are assigned online digital audiovisual lectures and textbook readings for the rest of the content on a topic. Our model of blended learning does not require the student to do any pre-class learning except for the prerequisites. I'm mentioning this because many people ask me what is my definition of blended learning, and that's what it is. While the blended modality was associated with improved cognitive and classroom environment over the traditional classroom for numerical methods, the question that could be asked, can we improve the blended class even further by using other evidence-based learning strategies not used so far in the classroom? Or would there be a limited effect of these interventions? Would these additional low investment learning strategies, specifically cumulative tests and practice tests, further improve the blended classroom? Cumulative exams are quite common in STEM higher education, but only for final exams or a concept inventory, and those are all held at the end of the semester. Although such exams are overwhelming to students because of the amount of content, they are beneficial for long-term retention and hence provide better preparation for future courses, especially where the content of the course is critical prerequisite. What if the midterm tests were made cumulative as opposed to being unit tests? I gave about 3 to 4 unit tests during the course. The unit tests were hence replaced by cumulative tests in this study. Although the content emphasis on the cumulative tests were on recently covered topics since the earlier tests, the previous content was nonetheless a substantial part of the test, varying from 33 to 50% of the test by score. Practice tests are known to improve student performance as they get to demonstrate their conceptual and procedural knowledge, become familiar with the format of the test, and get encouraged to discuss difficult topics. Based on a meta-analysis of 272 studies, the average effect size has been found to be 0.74 over other learning conditions. What if practice tests were offered to the students before each of the cumulative tests? Practice tests were given to students before each cumulative test. To avoid any bias, the practice tests were made through a computer program that selects problems randomly from a database consisting of 167 questions. The questions in the database are the same that are used in classwork and homework. For the first test, one practice test was posted, while 2 practice tests were posted for each of the next 3 tests. The practice tests were posted 2 days before the test to avoid students preparing using only the practice tests and to develop a false sense of preparation. All students were recommended to take the practice tests at home in conditions similar to the tests, like we use 75 minutes of time, a TI-30XA calculator, and an instructor-made formula sheet. To look at the results, what we found out is that the difference in the average student score on the final examination, the two treatments, we were calling it blended learning, which is the control group, and the modified blended learning, which includes these cumulative tests and practice tests. And we used ANOVA analysis with controlling, because we were doing this in different semesters. We use GPA from the prerequisite coursework as a control variable. And what we found out is the difference in the average score was not statistically significant, but the effect size was 0.27 in favor of the modified blended learning. The blended classroom which we are talking about, where we had cumulative and practice tests included. Several studies show a correlation between learning environments and student academic achievement. So the discernment of the students' learning environment is mostly measured by surveys, and one such survey is the well-established college and university classroom environment inventory. Most of you are familiar with the acronym CUCEI. This survey has 7 psychosocial dimensions. The inventory consists of 49 questions on these 7 dimensions. And students rate the questions on a scale of 1, which stands for strongly disagree, to 5, which stands for strongly agree. For example, the dimension of cohesiveness stands for to what extent students know and help one another. And individualization stands for to what extent students are treated individually and differentially. The effect sizes for all the 7 dimensions were calculated by using a multivariate analysis of covariance, and they range from -0.19 to -0.98, all in favor of the control group, the blended classroom. We just don't have a categorical explanation, but it might be because the cumulative tests are not looked upon favorably by students. Also, since homework assignments were not graded, many students may not have been as prepared for the in-class active learning of the prerequisite knowledge needed for the new content covered in the lectures and the active learning exercises we do. The reason why we didn't pick up these assignments for grading was because in an earlier study about 10 years ago or so, we found out that whether you pick a homework for grading or not, you assign it, but whether you pick it up or not for grading, it does not affect student performance. However, as we are trying to incorporate more active learning in our classrooms, I believe that maybe having assigned graded online quizzes is a good idea, because the feedback is immediate, and hence we can use it immediately in the classes which follow the previous ones. So in the spring 2020, we reverted back to assigning graded online quizzes to improve pre-class learning as well as possibly the classroom environment. However, because of COVID-19, the data collected is not compatible. When face-to-face classes will start again, I think we're going to collect one more semester of data to find out if we are going to get similar or different results for the modified blended class. The reason why the data is not compatible because we had to change our final exam because it was an online environment, it was open notes, and so we got to figure out a way to be able to make a good comparable analysis in a face-to-face class later on. There are limitations to the study, as you must have already observed. The study has been conducted only for one course, only for one semester, only at one single institution. I'm hoping that some of my colleagues who are listening to this presentation may implement it for a different course, maybe do it over a couple of semesters, and hoping that it covers several different institutions. Also, we did not collect any student reviews of such grading policy. via surveys or focus groups. So that's also important to figure out what could be improved in implementing these two learning strategies of practice tests and cumulative tests. However, we are finding out that there's no harm being done. The implementation of the grading policy is simple. It does require a little bit of investment of time and effort, but it can have a huge return on the investment. Thank you for your time, and I will answer any questions when the moderator gives us the green signal for doing that. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.